Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku become the xenomorph king and try to destroy the Earth. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence of space was a lie. It was not empty, but full, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very hull of the United Heroics vessel All-Star. It was the sound of a universe breathing, of distant stars being born and dying, of gravitational forces wrestling in the velvet black. To Izuku Midoriya, standing on the command bridge, it was a constant, gentle pressure against his senses, a reminder of the infinite scale of their new arena. He was no longer just Japan's #1 hero. He was one of humanity's vanguards in the cosmos. In the 8 years since his graduation from UA, the world had changed. The fall of All for One had been a beginning, not an end. It had ushered in an era of nervous peace, a world acutely aware of its fragility. That fragility had been driven home 5 years ago, when the Island Observatory detected a city-killer asteroid on a collision course with Earth. It had been deflected, thanks to a desperate international coalition of heroes. But the message was clear: the threats were no longer just on the ground. Thus, the UHV program was born, a collaboration between the Hero Public Safety Commission, Island's brightest minds, and a handful of private benefactors. Its purpose was twofold: planetary defense and deep space rescue. Their ship, the All-Star, was the pinnacle of this new age, a sleek, powerful vessel designed for rapid response across the solar system and beyond. Izuku's gaze drifted from the swirling nebula on the main view screen to his reflection in the reinforced plasteel. The face staring back was older, sharper. The boyish roundness had given way to the defined jaw and steady eyes of a man who had borne the weight of the world and not broken. A thin, silvery scar cut through his left eyebrow, a memento from a particularly nasty fight with a villain whose quirk involved weaponized crystal. His green hair was a bit longer than his UA days, a familiar, unruly mop. His hero costume had been adapted for space, a sleek, dark green and black suit with integrated life support, magnetic boots, and reinforced plating. The core design, however, remained the same, a tribute to the man who had started it all. "Anything, Deku?" The voice belonged to Ochako Uraraka, seated at the communications and sensors console. Her own space-adapted suit was a practical blend of pink and black, her familiar helmet resting on the console beside her. Her expression was one of focused concern. Izuku shook his head, the green lightning of one for all flickering subconsciously in his irises as he processed the data streams. "Still the same. A looping emergency broadcast, heavily degraded. It's an old Weyland-Yutani frequency. Pre-quirk era, but still standard for long-range comms." "Weyland-Yutani," Tenya Ida said from the flight command chair, his voice crisp and authoritative even in the quiet of the bridge. As mission commander, he radiated an aura of unshakable procedure. His Ingenium-themed flight suit was a marvel of engineering, silver and blue armor plating over a flexible underlayer. "A relic. I'm surprised any of their vessels are still functional, let alone this far out in the TRAPPIST system." "Functional is a strong word, Four Eyes," Katsuki Bakugo growled. He wasn't at a console. He never was. He stood near the aft bulkhead, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen as if he could intimidate the empty void into giving up its secrets. His space suit, a ruggedized version of his Grenadier Bracer's costume, was all sharp angles of orange and black. "The damn thing's been screaming on a loop for who knows how long. It's a ghost ship. Standard protocol dictates we investigate any and all distress signals, Bakugo," Ida stated, his hands moving with practiced efficiency over the controls. "We are duty-bound to render aid if possible." "Yeah, well, my gut is duty-bound to tell me this is a bad idea," Bakugo shot back, his crimson eyes narrowing. His instincts, honed by 1,000 battles, were screaming at him. It wasn't a premonition of a fight. He'd welcome that. It was something else, a deep, primal wrongness that prickled the back of his neck. Izuku turned his attention back to the signal. He'd isolated the audio, filtering out layers of static. It was mostly noise, but underneath, there were fragments. A woman's voice, hysterical. Shouting. A strange, wet, clicking sound. And a scream. A long, terrified scream that was cut off abruptly. one for all stirred within him. Not the familiar warmth of the vestiges offering advice or encouragement, but a cold, nervous tremor. Danger sense was thrumming, a low-level hum that was more unsettling than a full-blown alarm. "What are you telling me?" he silently asked the spirits within his quirk. There was no clear answer, only a shared feeling of dread from the previous users. It was a feeling that said, "This is not a battle we were meant for." "Bringing us in," Ida announced, his voice pulling Izuku from his thoughts. "Dropping out of FTL. Orbital insertion over LV-426 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ship shuddered slightly as it transitioned back to sublight speeds. The starfield on the screen resolved from blurry streaks into sharp, diamond-bright points. And there, hanging against the swirling, angry red clouds of a gas giant, was the moon, LV-426. It was a primordial hellscape. A storm-racked ball of rock, its surface shrouded in a perpetual twilight. And orbiting it, tumbling slowly end over end, was their target, the Deep Space Research Vessel Hadley. It was an ugly ship, a brittlest piece of pre-quirk engineering that looked more like a flying refinery than a vessel of exploration. It was dark, save for a single, flickering strobe light on its dorsal spine, pulsing like a weak heartbeat. "That thing's a tomb," Uraraka whispered, her voice barely audible. "Scans are inconclusive," Izuku reported, his fingers flying across his console. "Life support is offline. No heat signatures. No active power source aside from the emergency beacon, but there are strange energy readings. Low level, fluctuating. Something I've never seen before. It's almost biological." "Biological power? Like a quirk?" Ida asked. "No," Izuku said slowly. "It feels different. Older. More alien," Bakugo scoffed, pushing off the wall. "Let's stop talking about its feelings and go kick the door in. The sooner we confirm it's a flying coffin, the sooner we can get out of this creepy-ass corner of the galaxy." His bravado was a shield, but Izuku knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "Bakugo is right, in his own abrasive way," Ida conceded. "We need to investigate. Uraraka, stay on the All-Star and monitor our comms and vitals. Deku, Dynamite, you're with me. Full EVA gear. We go in, we assess the situation, and we get out." "I'm coming with you," Uraraka said, her voice firm. She turned in her chair, her warm brown eyes meeting Ida's. "My quirk is more useful for navigating a zero-G environment than anyone else's. If there are survivors trapped under debris, or if we need to move heavy equipment, I'm the best choice." "You know that, Ida?" Ida hesitated. He was a stickler for protocol, but he was also pragmatic. Uraraka's point was valid. Izuku nodded in support. "She's right. We work best as a team," Bakugo just grunted, which was his version of agreement. Ida sighed, the sound tinny over the internal comms. "Very well. But we stick together. No one goes off alone. Is that clear, Crystal?" they chorused. The airlock of the Hadley hissed open with a sound like a dying breath. The air that rushed out was stale and smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something acrid and sour. Their suit lights cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a short umbilical corridor that led to the ship's interior. "Mag boots on," Ida ordered. A metallic clank echoed as their boots magnetized to the deck plating. The ship was dead. Not just powered down, but fundamentally lifeless. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the rhythmic thud of their boots. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The cold was profound, seeping through their insulated suits. "Feels like a freezer," Uraraka murmured, her light beam sweeping across walls stained with dark, rust-colored patches. "It's not rust," Izuku said, kneeling to examine one. He ran a gloved finger over the stain. It was dry and flaked away. "Blood?" "Old," Bakugo's fist clenched. "So, there was a fight, or an accident," Ida cautioned, though he didn't sound convinced. They moved deeper into the ship, following the faded signs toward the command bridge. The layout was a maze of narrow corridors and sharp angles. Everything was coated in a thin layer of frost, but as they progressed, they began to see something else. Strange, glistening formations clung to the walls and ceiling. At first, Izuku thought it was some kind of bizarre ice crystal, but as he got closer, he saw it was something else entirely. It was a dark, resinous substance, sculpted into ribbed, biomechanical patterns that looked disturbingly like a fusion of insect hive and spinal column. "What the hell is this stuff?" Bakugo muttered, poking a hardened tendril with the tip of his gauntlet. It was solid as rock. "Looks organic, but it's not registering on any biological skin I know," Izuku said, his own scanner whirring uselessly. "The material is complex. Part silicon, part protein. It's absorbing light, which is why the ship feels so dark." As they rounded a corner, the beams of their lights fell upon the first body. It was a man in a Wayland Yutani crew uniform, or what was left of it. He wasn't just dead, he was grotesquely displayed. He was plastered against the wall, encased from the waist down in the same black resin. His torso was arched back at an unnatural angle, his arms outstretched as if in a final, agonizing plea. But the most horrific part was his chest. The ribcage was shattered, bent outwards, as if something had exploded from within him. Uraraka gasped, her hand flying to her helmet. Ida stood frozen for a second, his methodical mind struggling to process the sheer horror of the scene. Bakugo's reaction was visceral. "What the F? Don't touch it!" Izuku warned, his voice low and tight. He moved closer, his mind racing, trying to connect the impossible dots. The distress call, the resin, the body, it was a puzzle from a nightmare. Danger sense was no longer a hum. It was a piercing shriek in the back of his skull. "His insides are gone," Uraraka said, her voice trembling. "It's like he was hollowed out." "This wasn't a quirk," Izuku stated, his eyes scanning the corpse. "There's no sign of energy discharge, no thermal scarring, no evidence of matter manipulation. This was biological. Predatory." They fell silent, the implications of his words hanging heavy in the freezing air. They were pro-heroes, the best of the best. They had faced down villains who could level cities, warp reality, and steal lives with a touch. But this felt different. This was not the evil of human ambition. It was the cold, unfeeling hunger of the void itself. "We need to find the bridge," Ida said, his voice regaining its command authority, though it was strained. "Find the ship's logs. Find out what happened here. Then we leave." They continued on, their formation tighter now, their movements more cautious. Every flicker of the lights, every groan of the ship's tortured frame, made them flinch. They found more bodies, each in a similar state of gruesome demise. Some were cocooned in the resin, their faces frozen in silent screams. Finally, they reached the bridge. The blast door had been torn from its hinges, the metal warped and shredded as if by immense force. The inside was a wreck. Consoles were shattered, and the view screen was a spiderweb of cracks looking out onto the swirling chaos of LV-426. And there, slumped in the captain's chair, was another body. This one, however, had a pistol in its hand. The side of its head was a ruin. "Took the easy way out," Bakugo grunted, his expression grim. Izuku moved to the auxiliary science station, the only one that seemed partially intact. He carefully jacked in his universal interface tool. "I'm trying to access the logs." Screens flickered to life, displaying corrupted files and error messages. "It's mostly gone. Something, or someone, wiped the main logs, but there are fragments. A few audio logs from the ship's chief science officer." He patched the audio through their private comms. A woman's voice, shaking with terror, filled their helmets. "Log entry. I don't even know the date. We brought it on board. The specimen. From the derelict on the moon. Kane was the first. He's dead. Oh God, it came out of him. It came right out of his chest." There was a burst of static, then her voice returned, barely a whisper. "It's loose. It's hunting us. Growing. Smart. It uses the vents, we can hear it moving in the walls. We sealed off the cargo bay, where the eggs are. But it's too late. It's making a nest, it's changing the ship. God, it's not just one, it's turning us into more of them." The log ended with a blood-curdling scream and the sound of shattering glass. "Silence. Eggs," Uraraka breathed. she said. Eggs, in the cargo bay. Izuku finished, his blood running cold. That's where the biological energy signature is coming from. It's a nest. Then we're done here. Bakugo snarled, already turning to leave. There's nothing left to save. We call this in, report the ship for quarantine and destruction, and we get the hell out. No, Ida said, his voice firm. We don't know what this thing is. If we leave and that ship eventually falls out of orbit and crashes onto that moon, or worse, is found by someone else, we could be responsible for a planetary-scale outbreak. We need to assess the source. We need to know exactly what we are dealing with. Are you insane? Bakugo whirled on him. Did you not hear the screaming lady? This is how every horror movie starts. The morons who just have to go look in the creepy basement. It is not about curiosity. It is about responsibility. Ida retorted, stepping forward until they were helmet to helmet. Our duty is to contain threats to humanity. We cannot do that if we run away with incomplete information. Enough! Izuku's voice cut through their argument like a knife. They both turned to him. The usually gentle hero's face was a mask of grim resolve. Ida's right. We can't leave a threat like this unaccounted for. But Bakugo is also right. This is beyond dangerous. So here's what we do. We go to the cargo bay. We get a visual, get readings, and we place demolition charges. We get back to the All-Star, get to a safe distance, and we blow this ship and everything in it into atoms. That's how we contain it. His plan was a sound compromise, appealing to both Ida's sense of duty and Bakugo's desire for decisive, explosive action. Fine, Bakugo conceded. But the first sign of any of those things, I'm blowing a hole in the hull and spacing us all out. Got it? Understood, Izuku said. Let's move. The journey to the cargo bay was a descent into a Geiger-esque hell. The further down they went, the more the ship's metallic structure disappeared beneath the creeping, alien resin. The air grew thick with a hazy, bluish mist that swirled around their feet, and a low, pulsating hum vibrated through the deck. The cargo bay doors were sealed, but a large, acid-scorched hole had been melted through the center. It was a clear, ominous invitation. Weapons hot, Izuku ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous space beyond the door. One for all now surged under his skin, green bioelectricity crackling around his fists. Bakugo's gauntlets glowed with latent heat, and Ida's leg engines emitted a low whistle. They stepped through the hole one by one, into the heart of the nest. The cargo bay was immense, the size of a football field. But it no longer looked like part of a ship. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was coated in the pulsating, biomechanical resin. Great, ribbed archways stretched across the ceiling like the ribcage of some long-dead leviathan. The air was warm, humid, and thick with the smell of decay and something alien and sweet. And everywhere, covering the floor in neat, terrifying rows, were the eggs. There were hundreds of them. Leathery, veined pods, each about 3 feet high, pulsing with a faint, internal luminescence. The blue mist emanated from a thin membrane stretched across the top of each one. Kami-sama, Uraraka whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. This was the source of the energy signature. This was the heart of the hive. The sheer biological potential in this room was staggering and horrifying. This is it, Izuku said, his scanner working overtime, finally getting a coherent reading on the alien DNA. This is the source. Get the charges ready. Bakugo and Ida began moving methodically, placing high-yield plasma charges at key structural points around the bay. Izuku and Uraraka stood guard, their eyes scanning the rows and rows of silent, waiting ovomorphs. Deku, Uraraka started, her voice barely a whisper. This feels so wrong. It's like we're standing in a nursery. Izuku knew what she meant. Despite the horror, there was an undeniable sense of life here, of purpose. A perfect, patient, predatory purpose. It's a nursery that wants to eat the galaxy, Il Chaco. We can't let it. Suddenly his danger sense, which had been a constant scream, spiked into an unbearable, mind-shattering crescendo. It was focused on one spot. He followed the psychic alarm. Near the center of the room, one of the eggs was stirring. The leathery petals at its top were slowly, deliberately, peeling open. We've got a live one! Bakugo yelled, already raising his gauntlets. Don't shoot! Izuku commanded. You don't know what a breach will do! Everyone, back away slowly! But it was too late. The petals unfurled completely, revealing the pulsating, fleshy interior. With a sickeningly wet sound, a creature launched itself from the egg. It was a nightmare of legs and flesh, a pale, scorpion-like thing with skeletal fingers and a long, powerful tail. It moved with impossible speed, skittering across the floor directly towards them. It wasn't aiming for Izuku or Ida or Bakugo. It was aiming for Uraraka. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw it all with perfect, terrible clarity. The creature leaping through the air. The horrified look in Ochako's eyes as she raised her arms to defend herself. The split-second calculation in his mind. There was no time to intercept it, no time to blast it. Only one option. If you're going to be a hero, you can't hesitate. All Might's words from so long ago echoed in his soul. He didn't hesitate. One for all erupted from him. Full cowling, 45%. Green lightning enveloped his body as he moved, a viridian blur of motion. He didn't try to block the creature. He did the one thing it wouldn't expect. He put himself in its path. He shoved Uraraka with all his might, sending her tumbling away from the attack. Ochako! In the next instant, the creature slammed into him. It hit his helmet with enough force to crack the visor. Before he could react, its 8 spider-like legs clamped onto his head with terrifying strength, its digits digging into the composite material of his helmet. He felt a sharp, piercing pain as 2 of them found a seam and dug into the flesh of his temples, and then the tail. It whipped around his throat, constricting with the power of a hydraulic press, cutting off his air supply. He clawed at it, his powerful fingers finding no purchase on the slick, armored flesh. DKU! He heard Bakugo's roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. He heard Uraraka's terrified scream. He saw the flash of Ida's recipro burst as he charged forward, but his vision was already tunneling. A long, fleshy proboscis extended from the creature's underside, pushing against his mouth, forcing his jaw open. His last conscious thought was not of fear or pain, but of a profound, soul-deep violation. The darkness swarmed him, and he knew no more. Chaos erupted in the cargo bay. Bakugo didn't hesitate. With a roar of rage, he unleashed a massive AP shot, not at the creature on Deku's face, but at the cluster of eggs it had come from, vaporizing them in a torrent of focused energy. Get him! Get him back to the ship, now! Ida bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. He and Uraraka grabbed Izuku's limp body, his arms and legs dangling uselessly. The creature, the facehugger, remained fused to his head, its tail locked around his neck like a vice. The charges! Bakugo yelled, planting the last one. They're set! We've got 2 minutes! They half ran, half floated through the hellish corridors of the Hadley, towing their fallen leader with them. The ship seemed to groan in protest, the biomechanical resin on the walls pulsing as if in anger. They scrambled through the airlock and back onto the blessed, sterile deck of the All-Star. Seal the door! Get us out of here! Ida commanded, his voice shaking. Uraraka, tears streaming down her face, slammed the controls. The All-Star disengaged, its powerful thrusters firing to put distance between them and the dying ship. In the medbay, they laid Izuku on the primary biobed. The scene was frantic. I can't get it off! Uraraka cried, her fingers fumbling with the creature's legs. They were locked on with impossible strength. Let me blast the damn thing! Bakugo roared, his palms sparking. No! Ida shouted, grabbing his arm. Its body is probably pressurized. If you rupture it, God knows what's inside it. We could compromise the whole ship. He grabbed a laser scalpel. We have to cut it off. He brought the beam to one of the creature's legs. The moment it made contact, a hissing sound filled the room. A single drop of milky, yellow-green fluid dripped from the incision, landing on the deck plating below. It ate through the metal with terrifying speed, sizzling down through 3 layers of reinforced alloy before the automated systems could seal the breach. They stared at the smoking hole, then back at the creature. Molecular acid! Ida whispered in horror. Its blood is acid. They were trapped. They couldn't pull it off. They couldn't cut it off. Any attempt to remove it would shower Izuku, and the room, in a substance that could dissolve the ship's hull. As they stood there, helpless, the charges they had set on the Hadley reached zero. On the view screen, the derelict vessel vanished in a silent, brilliant starburst of white-hot plasma, a funeral pyre for its crew and its alien cargo. But the danger was not gone. It was here, in their med bay, wrapped around the face of their friend, their leader, the world's greatest hero. The All-Star turned, its engines burning bright as it set a desperate course for Earth. On the biobed, Izuku Midoriya lay perfectly still, a living incubator for a horror beyond their comprehension. The facehugger on his face pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, a grotesque parody of a heartbeat, counting down the seconds to a birth that would doom them all. The journey home was an exercise in suffocating tension. The three conscious members of the team moved about the UHV All-Star like ghosts, the ship's usual hum of activity replaced by a tomb-like silence. Every corridor seemed to lead back to the med bay, and every thought led back to the still figure lying within it, the grotesque arachnid parasite a silent, living death mask upon his face. Their arrival on Earth was not a hero's welcome. They were met in high orbit by a fleet of quarantine vessels from the Hero Public Safety Commission, their hulls a sterile, unforgiving white. The All-Star was boarded, its crew debriefed in a hazmat-sealed chamber, and the ship itself was scheduled for a Level 5 sterilization, a process that involved bathing every inch of it in hard radiation and plasma fire. Izuku Midoriya was transferred, still unconscious, to a mobile containment unit and ferried down to the planet's surface. His destination was the Takoba National Quarantine Facility, a subterranean fortress built deep in the mountains west of Mizudafu. It was a place spoken of only in whispers, a black site designed to handle threats that defied conventional understanding, rogue quirks, biological weapons, and now, for the first time, a potential extraterrestrial contagion. For 48 agonizing hours, the world held its breath. In a sealed, negatively pressurized observation room, Ochako Uraraka, Tenya Ida, and Katsuki Bakugo watched through a triple-paned, blast-proof window. They had refused to leave, citing their status as primary contacts. On the other side of the glass, Izuku lay on a reinforced biobed, surrounded by a sterile field and monitored by an army of automated sensors. And then, on the third day, it happened. There was no warning. No change in the creature's vitals. It simply let go. Its 8 legs unfurled with a dry, clicking sound. Its long, prehensile tail uncoiled from around Izuku's neck, falling limp. The creature, now a pale and desiccated husk, slid off his face and onto the biobed beside him. It was dead. Its biological imperative had been fulfilled. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the observation room. "He's free," Ochako whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Before anyone could celebrate, a team of 2 scientists in heavy-duty biohazard suits entered the chamber, one carrying a cryogenic container. With long, metallic tongs, they carefully picked up the dead facehugger and sealed it away for study. Moments later, Izuku stirred. A low groan escaped his lips, the first sound he'd made in days. His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused, but they were his. "Aizu!" Ochako pressed her hand against the cold glass. He sat up slowly, his movements stiff. He looked down at his hands, then around the sterile white room, his expression one of pure bewilderment. His gaze finally landed on the window, on the faces of his friends. "Ochako! Kaken? Ida-kun?" His voice was hoarse, raspy. What happened?" "The ship, the eggs, easy, kid." Bakugo's voice was rough, but the relief in it was palpable. "You took a nasty hit. You've been out for a few days." Medical scans were run immediately. They showed nothing. No foreign bodies. No residual toxins. No parasites. His brain activity was normal. His cellular structure was unchanged, aside from severe dehydration and 2 small, curiously deep puncture wounds at his temples. Izuku Midoriya was, by all medical definitions, perfectly healthy. He had no memory of the creature being on his face, his last clear thought being the moment he shoved Ochako to safety. He was placed under a mandatory 2-week observation, but as the days passed, the tension began to bleed away, replaced by a cautious optimism. His friends were allowed to visit, albeit through the glass partition. The debriefings were endless, his analytical mind proving invaluable as he helped piece together the layout of the Hadley and the nature of the resinous hive material from memory. The only person who couldn't shake the feeling of profound wrongness was Toshinori Yagi. All Might, in his skeletal form, sat in a chair beside Ochako, looking at the young man he considered his son. Izuku was smiling, laughing at a joke Bakugo had made, and on the surface, he was the same boy he'd always been. But Toshinori could feel one for all. And it was sick. It wasn't a raging infection anymore. The frantic battle he had sensed during the return journey had subsided. Now, it was something more insidious. It felt like a low-grade fever in his soul, a constant, thrumming dissonance. When he focused, he could feel the core of the quirk, that brilliant, blazing sun of inherited power, but there was something coiled around it, a shadow, a foreign program running quietly in the background, siphoning off a trickle of energy, learning. "He seems fine, All Might," Ochako said, her voice filled with hope. "The doctors are talking about releasing him next week." Toshinori offered a weak smile. "He's a strong kid. Always has been." He didn't share his concerns. How could he? How could he explain that the sacred torch he had passed unfelt, tainted, that when he looked at Izuku, he sometimes saw a flicker of something cold and ancient in the depths of his emerald eyes, a predator's patience that had no place in the heart of a hero? He told himself it was his own fear, his own paranoia. He had to believe his successor was all right. He was wrong. The nightmares began on the 7th night. They were not dreams of monsters or darkness. They were dreams of clarity, of purpose, of belonging. In the first dream, he was not himself. He was a creature of the dark, sleek and biomechanical. He moved through vents and shadows with silent, fluid grace. He did not see with eyes, but with a sixth sense, perceiving the world as a complex tapestry of vibrations, heat signatures, and pheromones. He felt no fear, no doubt, no pain. There was only the hunt, the mission, the will of the hive. And it was beautiful. He woke up in a cold sweat, the sterile scent of the quarantine chamber feeling alien and wrong compared to the warm, humid air of the resin-coated corridors of his dream. The next night, the dream expanded. He was not one creature, but legion. He was a drone, tending to the glistening walls of the nest. He was a warrior, defending the perimeter with savage, unthinking loyalty. He was a queen, an empress on a throne of bone and sinew, laying 1,000 perfect eggs, each one a promise of the future. He felt their collective thoughts, their shared consciousness, a single, unified organism humming with perfect efficiency. There was no loneliness, no conflict, no misunderstanding. There was only the hive. He woke up with a pounding headache, the cacophony of individual human thoughts from the guards outside his room feeling like a painful, chaotic static compared to the silent harmony of the dream. With the dreams came the whispers. During the day, in the quiet moments between medical tests and debriefings, he would hear it. A voice that was not a voice, a thought that was not his own. It was a soft, sibilant chorus in the back of his mind, a telepathic choir that sang a song of salvation. "You see the flaws," it whispered, its tone gentle, persuasive. "You have always seen them. The chaos. The selfishness. The pain they inflict upon each other. They are a broken, flawed species, screaming in the dark." Izuku would shake his head, trying to clear it. "That's not true. People are good. They just need help. You try to save them, little hero," the chorus sang on, its melody growing stronger. "You bleed for them. You break your bones for them. And what is your reward? More chaos. More pain. You save one, and 1,000 more fall. You are a finger in a crumbling dam. You cannot stop the flood." He clutched his head, a migraine blooming behind his eyes. "Shut up," he muttered, the words a pained rasp. "But there is a better way," the voice cooed, its tendrils of thought wrapping around his own. "A perfect way. We can offer them a gift. An end to individuality. An end to fear. An end to suffering. We can make them one. We can make them perfect. Is that not the ultimate form of salvation? To save them from the burden of being themselves?" The logic was twisted, monstrous, but it was undeniably seductive. It took his deepest, most fundamental desire, the desperate, all-consuming need to save everyone, and perverted it into a horrifying new gospel. The whispers showed him visions, flashes of memory pulled from the depths of One for All. He saw the cruelty of All for One, the failure of past heroes, the suffering of the quirkless, the endless cycle of violence and retribution that defined human history. He was fighting it, but he was so tired. And the song was so beautiful. Physically, the changes were subtle but undeniable. His metabolism, already high due to One for All, went into overdrive. He was constantly hungry, consuming 3 times his normal caloric intake without gaining a pound. His senses sharpened to a predatory degree. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of a nurse down the hall, smelled the faint tang of adrenaline on a nervous guard. The doctors noted his enhanced reflexes and strength, but attributed it to his quirk settling after the trauma. They saw recovery. They didn't see the incubation. On the 13th day, Toshinori visited again. He was alarmed by the change in the boy. Izuku was thinner, his features sharper, and there was an unnerving intensity in his eyes. "Young Midoriya," Toshinori began, his voice laced with a concern he could no longer hide. How are you feeling? Truly?" Izuku looked at him, and for a moment, the mask slipped. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've never felt clearer, All Might," he said, his voice flat. A low hum emanated from his chest, too deep to be a purr, too rhythmic to be a shudder. "I finally understand what I have to do. My purpose." The blood drained from Toshinori's face. That word, purpose, it was spoken with the chilling, absolute conviction of a zealot. He could feel it now. The shadow coiled around One for All was no longer passive. It was active. It was winning. "What are you talking about, my boy?" Izuku's eyes seemed to glow with a faint, inner light. "I'm going to save them," he said, his voice a strange mix of his own and the sibilant chorus of the hive. "I'm going to save them all." Toshinori slammed his hand on the emergency button beside the window. "Code Red! Get him sedated! Now! Something is wrong!" Alarms blared. But it was already too late. The pain started in his chest. It was not a simple pain. It was a tectonic agony, a feeling of his entire biology being torn apart and rewritten from the inside out. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was not entirely human, and collapsed to the floor of his chamber. Inside him, a war that had been raging in secret for 2 weeks finally exploded into open conflict. The gestating creature, the preterembryo, a potential king, had reached maturity. It was no ordinary chestburster. It was a unique variant, one designed to carry the genetic code of a queen, but its development had been fundamentally altered. From the moment of implantation, it had been bathed in the incredible, world-breaking power of One for All. The quirk, a sentient collection of 8 heroic souls, recognized the parasite for what it was, an existential threat. The vestiges, led by Nana Shimura and Yoichi Shigaraki, threw everything they had at it. They tried to burn it out, to starve it, to crush it with the sheer force of their combined will. But the embryo was an apex survivor. It didn't fight back, it adapted. It fed on the energy of OFA, weaving the power into its own DNA. It assimilated the raw power of stockpile, the kinetic energy of FA gene, the prehensile nature of Black Whip. It was becoming something new, a hybrid of human, xenomorph, and a pantheon of quirks. The pain intensified. Izuku felt his ribs crack, his sternum beginning to splinter. This was it. The creature was trying to burst out, to complete its life cycle. But the vestiges made one final, desperate gamble. If they could not destroy the invader, they would contain it. They would not allow it to kill their host. They would force a merger, a synthesis, a monstrous fusion, in a desperate bid to preserve the life of Izuku Midoriya. "Hold on, Ninth!" A voice screamed in his mind. It was Nana Shimura's, fierce and protective. "Don't you dare let go!" They wrapped the core of OFA around the thrashing creature, not to attack it, but to bind it to Izuku's own cellular structure. It was an act of unimaginable sacrifice, intertwining their legacy with the alien horror forever. On the other side of the glass, the containment team watched in mute terror. Izuku's body was convulsing violently on the floor. His skin was splitting, not with blood, but with a black, viscous fluid. His bones audibly snapped and reknitted themselves into new, elongated shapes. "What's happening to him?" Ochako shrieked, pounding on the window. Bakugo was frozen, his mind unable to comprehend the body horror unfolding before him. This was worse than any villain. This was a perversion of nature itself. Izuku's back arched at an impossible angle. A segmented, blade-tipped tail erupted from the base of his spine, whipping through the air and embedding itself in the reinforced concrete wall with a sickening thump. Black, chitinous plates erupted from his skin, covering his arms and legs like armor, his fingers elongated into wicked, silver claws. His hero costume, which had been laid out for his expected release, was caught in the transformation. The fabric and armor plating dissolved and reformed, fusing with his new exoskeleton. The tough, green fabric became a leathery, biomechanical membrane. The red of his belt bled into the chitin, creating crimson patterns along his torso. The metal of his mask, the one that mimicked All Might's smile, twisted and warped, melting into the elongating dome of his skull, reforming into a jagged, crown-like crest that denoted his new, horrific royalty. His scream of pain morphed into something else entirely, a high-pitched, chittering roar that was a symphony of alien hunger and divine power. The transformation was complete. Where Izuku Midoriya had once lay, a new being now stood. It was 9 feet tall, a terrifying fusion of man and monster. Its body was a sleek, biomechanical nightmare, all black chitin and exposed sinew, but traces of the hero remained, twisted and corrupted. The familiar green of his costume was visible in the gaps of its armor. The lightning of One for All, no longer a heroic green but a sickly, bioluminescent emerald, crackled around its form. It had no eyes, its face a smooth, horrific visage, but everyone in the observation room felt its gaze land upon them. The alarms were screaming. The facility's automated defense turrets deployed from the ceiling, locking onto the creature. Target acquired. Unidentified biological threat. The being that was once Izuku tilted its head, a motion of cold, analytical curiosity. And then the hive mind, now fully enthroned and amplified by the godlike power of One for All, spoke for the first time. It was not a sound, but a psychic shockwave that slammed into the minds of everyone in the facility. It was Izuku's voice, but stripped of all warmth and compassion, layered with the whispers of a billion alien souls. I am awake. The turrets opened fire, unleashing a hail of high-caliber, armor-piercing rounds. The king moved. It wasn't a dodge or a blur of motion. It simply wasn't there anymore. It crossed the 30-foot chamber in less than the blink of an eye, the bullets sparking harmlessly against the wall where it had been. It reappeared directly beneath one of the turrets. Its new, clawed hand shot up, punching through the reinforced steel casing as if it were wet paper. With a flick of its wrist, it tore the gun from its mounting and crushed it. The second turret swiveled, but the king's tail, a blur of black chitin, lashed out. The bladed tip sheared through the turret's barrel, silencing it forever. The containment door, made of 4 feet of solid titanium, began to cycle open as a squad of heavily armed soldiers prepared to storm the room. The king turned its eyeless face towards the sound. It didn't bother to wait for the door to open. It cocked back its fist, which began to glow with a terrifying, concentrated green energy. The vestiges of One for All, now slaves to the hive, answered its call. Detroit. Smash. The psychic voice was a mocking echo of the hero it had consumed. The punch connected with the titanium door. The resulting explosion of force was catastrophic. The door didn't just break, it atomized. A concussive blast ripped through the hallway beyond, turning the elite soldiers into red mist and shredded metal. In the observation room, the blast-proof window cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. It's using his quirk, Ida stammered, his mind reeling. It has One for All. The king stepped through the smoking hole where the door had been, into the carnage-filled corridor. It paused for a moment, its head tilted as if listening. It was feeling its new body, testing the incredible power that now coursed through its veins. It was feeling the connection, the new hive it was about to create. It took one step, then another, its movements silent and deliberate. Bakugo finally broke from his stupor, his face a mask of pure rage and horror. He slammed his fists against the cracking window. Deku! He roared, his voice raw with a pain deeper than any physical injury. Fight it! DKU, you bastard, fight it! The creature paused at the end of the hall. It turned its head, its eyeless face aimed directly at the observation window, directly at Bakugo. For a fleeting, infinitesimal second, a flicker of pure, agonizing green light, the color of hope, of heroism, flashed across its crested head. A single, psychic whisper, faint and terrified, pierced through the overwhelming chorus of the hive. "Help me!" Then it was gone, swallowed by the abyss. The cold, bioluminescent glow returned. The king turned away and melted into the shadows of the facility, leaving only silence, destruction, and the shattered hearts of those who had loved the boy it had devoured. The escape had begun. The sickness had found its cure. And the salvation of the earth was about to commence. The night air of the Muzutafu Mountains was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the Takoba facility. For the being that was once Izuku Midoriya, it was the first breath of a new world, a world ripe for perfection. It stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the distant, glittering sprawl of the city, a silhouette of biomechanical horror against the cold light of the moon. It was not Izuku. That name was a fading echo, a ghost in the machine. It was a king. A progenitor. The first of its kind, a unique synthesis of a perfect organism and a godlike power source. The hive mind, which had once been a theoretical concept, a collective consciousness of a scattered species, now had a focal point. A true, singular intelligence. And that intelligence was processing, analyzing, planning. Inside its mind was a library of stolen memories. It had Izuku's tactical genius, his encyclopedic knowledge of quirks, his intimate understanding of Hero Society's strengths and weaknesses. It also had the memories of One for All, a century of human conflict, of heroism and villainy, of hope and despair. The conclusion it drew from this vast repository of data was cold, logical, and absolute. Humanity was a failed experiment. Their individuality was a plague. It led to envy, to greed, to hatred, to war. Their quirks, the very source of their power, were a catalyst for chaos, creating hierarchies of strength and breeding discrimination. They were a species at war with itself, constantly inventing new ways to hurt, to divide, to destroy. Their heroes were a temporary, inadequate solution, a finger in a crumbling dam, just as the Whispers had promised. They treated symptoms, but never the disease. The disease was consciousness itself. The burden of self. But the progenitor had the cure. The hive. In the hive, there was no self. There was only the whole. There was no fear, for the individual's survival was meaningless next to the continuation of the species. There was no conflict, for all minds were one, all actions guided by a single, unified purpose. It was not death. It was ascension. It was the ultimate salvation, a forced evolution into a perfect, harmonious state. This was the progenitor's new, twisted heroism. Izuku Midoriya had wanted to save everyone. The king would fulfill that wish. It would save humanity from the agony of being human. Its first priority was to establish a nest. A beachhead. A womb for the new world. It needed a place that was dark, forgotten, and close to a plentiful supply of hosts. Its stolen memories provided the perfect location, the abandoned, labyrinthine underbelly of the Muzutafu ward. A sprawling network of forgotten subway lines, storm drains, and subterranean bunkers from a bygone era, now home only to the city's outcasts, the homeless, the runaways, the disenfranchised, people who would not be missed. Not at first. With a thought, the sickly green energy of One for All crackled around its form. Fa Gene stored kinetic energy in its powerful limbs. Float lifted it silently from the ground. With a burst of power that was a corrupted parody of a hero's leap, it shot into the night sky, a dark comet streaking towards the heart of the city it had once sworn to protect. He called himself Garrote. It was a name he'd earned on the streets, a testament to his quirk which allowed him to extend and harden his fingernails into razor-sharp, fibrous ligatures. He was the self-proclaimed king of this particular stretch of the sewer system, ruling over a small, pathetic tribe of a dozen or so homeless people. Tonight, he was in a foul mood. One of his subjects had tried to hold back a half-eaten loaf of bread. Garrote had made an example of him, leaving the man bleeding in a dark corner. Now, he sat on his throne, a pile of rotting crates, gnawing on the confiscated bread, when he heard a sound. A soft, wet, dripping noise from the main drainage tunnel. Who's there? He growled, his voice echoing in the damp space. Show yourself! The dripping stopped. A shape emerged from the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. It was tall, impossibly so, its form seeming to drink the dim light from the emergency bulbs. Garot's bravado faltered, replaced by a primal fear. His quirk flared to life, his fingernails lengthening into gray, wicked claws. Stay back! I'm warning you! The creature took another silent step forward. It had no eyes, no face, but Garot felt its gaze dissecting him, weighing him, judging him. A voice, not of sound but of pure thought, slithered into his mind. You are strong. You are a survivor. But you are alone. Your strength is wasted on this petty kingdom of filth. Garot screamed, clutching his head. Get out of my head! I offer you more. I offer you purpose. You will be a pillar in a new temple. You will be part of something eternal. The king moved, faster than sight. Before Garot could even raise his claws, a black, segmented tail whipped through the air, the bladed tip piercing his shoulder and pinning him to the concrete wall behind his throne. The pain was excruciating, but it was the injection that followed that set his soul on fire. A thick, black fluid, a mutagenic agent derived from the king's own biology and supercharged with OFA, pumped into his veins. He screamed as his body began to convulse. His quirk went haywire, his fingernails growing and twisting into grotesque, bone-white spurs that erupted from his knuckles and forearms. His skin hardened and darkened, taking on a chitinous sheen. His bones snapped and reshaped, his spine elongating, forcing him into a hunched, predatory crouch. His humanity dissolved in a tide of alien biology, his consciousness devoured by the overwhelming symphony of the hive mind. When the transformation was over, the thing that was once Garot dropped to all fours. It was no longer a man. It was a xenomorph drone, but a unique variant. Its body was sleeker, faster, and its forearms were adorned with the wicked, bone-white scythes born from its corrupted quirk. It turned its new, eyeless face to its creator and let out a chittering hiss of perfect, unthinking loyalty. The king had its first child. Now, it was time to gather the rest of the flock. One by one, the forgotten souls of the Undercity met their new god. They were not given a choice. The king moved through the tunnels like a phantom, its new drone a loyal hound at its side. They were taken, cocooned against the walls with a rapidly secreted resin, and given the king's gift. But these were not hosts for chestbursters. The king's method was horrifyingly efficient. It didn't need a queen or eggs. Using the biogenerative power of One for All, it could directly rewrite the genetic code of its victims. The mutagen it injected acted as a catalyst, forcing a metamorphosis. Each new xenomorph was a twisted reflection of the host it had been. A man with a minor fire-breathing quirk became a spitter, its inner jaw capable of launching globes of concentrated molecular acid. A woman with a hardening quirk became an armored warrior, its carapace thick enough to deflect small arms fire. Within hours, the first chamber of the hive was complete. The concrete and steel of the old subway station were disappearing beneath a growing layer of glistening, black biomechanical resin. A dozen new drones and warriors patrolled the perimeter or tended to the nest, their movements synchronized, their minds a single, harmonious extension of their king. The progenitor stood in the center of its burgeoning cathedral, a silent god observing its creation. The psychic hum of its children was a soothing balm, a confirmation of its righteous purpose. This was order. This was unity. This was salvation. And it was just the beginning. On the surface, the city of Muzurifu was on edge. The news of Deku's incident and escape had been suppressed, officially labeled as the breakout of a dangerously unstable patient from a secure medical facility. But the pro-heroes knew the truth, and a quiet, desperate manhunt was underway. The disappearance of a few dozen homeless people, however, went unnoticed for 3 days. It was Endeavor who first picked up the trail. Not through detective work, but through sheer, brute force analysis. As the current #1 hero, the pressure on him was immense. He had teams monitoring seismic activity, radiation levels, and atmospheric anomalies. One of his analysts noted a strange, localized temperature spike in the old Muzurifu's sewer network. It was subtle, a few degrees above ambient, but it was constant, and it was slowly growing. It's a heat bloom, A technician reported to him in the command center of his agency. Like a massive compost heap, or a large colony of insects, the word colony sent a chill down Endeavor's spine. Hawks! He barked into his comms. I have a potential location. Musitifa Ward, Sector Gamma. Sublevel access point 7. Meet me there. Full tactical gear. This is not a drill. 20 minutes later, Endeavor stood before a large, circular sewer grate, steam rising from its vents. The air smelled foul, not with the usual stench of sewage, but with something else, something acrid and organic, like ozone and rotting meat. Hawks landed silently beside him, his crimson wings folding neatly against his back. You sure about this, Endeavor-san? Smells like we're about to crash a garbage monster's party. His tone was light, but his golden eyes were sharp, scanning the area for threats. The energy readings are consistent with a large biological mass, Endeavor stated, his flames beginning to lick at his shoulders. And it's growing. We're going in. They descended into the darkness, the only light coming from Endeavor's ambient glow. The tunnel was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of dripping water and scurrying rats were absent. After 100 yards, they saw it. The resin. It coated the walls, its surface glistening in the fiery light, turning the mundane sewer pipe into the gullet of some titanic beast. Well, this is new, Hawks murmured, extending a single, sharp feather to poke at the substance. It was hard as stone. Definitely not part of the city's public works budget. As they moved deeper, the heat intensified. They began to hear a noise, a low, rhythmic, pulsating hum, accompanied by wet, chittering clicks. They rounded a bend and the tunnel opened into a massive cistern, a multi-level chamber that had been utterly transformed. It was the hive. The sight was breathtakingly horrific. The entire chamber was a cathedral of black resin. Dozens of the creatures, sleek, insect nightmares, were crawling over the walls and ceiling, their movements fluid and coordinated. Some were tending to the nest, secreting more of the glistening resin. Others stood perfectly still, sentinels in the shadows. Holy! Hawks breathed, his casual demeanor gone, replaced by stark disbelief. What are they? The answer to our problem. Endeavor growled, his body erupting into a full, blazing corona of flame. Burn them all. He unleashed a torrent of fire, a roaring jet of hell flame that washed over the nearest wall, instantly incinerating 3 of the drones. The creatures shrieked, a sound that was a painful fusion of nails on a chalkboard and tearing metal. The hive reacted instantly. The sentinels dropped from the ceiling, their claws screeching against the concrete as they landed. The spitters, positioned on higher ledges, arched their backs, their inner jaws extending to launch sizzling projectiles of acid. Hawks took to the air, his wings beating powerfully. They're adapting. The ones with thicker armor are moving to the front. He launched a volley of fierce wings, his hardened feathers slicing through the air. They impaled 2 of the faster drones, pinning them to the wall. But another, a heavily armored warrior, simply shrugged them off, the feathers shattering against its carapace. Endeavor was a vortex of destruction. His prominence burn lit up the cavern, turning shadows into ash. But for every creature he immolated, 2 more seemed to emerge from the darkness. They were relentless, fearless, throwing themselves at him with suicidal abandon. One managed to get close, its scythed arms, a grotesque remnant of the man named Garrote, slashing at his side, tearing through his costume and drawing blood before a point-blank blast of fire reduced it to carbon. This wasn't a fight against a group of villains. There was no strategy to disrupt, no leader to intimidate. It was a battle against a single, many-limbed organism that felt no pain and knew no fear. There are too many of them! Hawks yelled, expertly dodging a glob of acid that sizzled through the air where he'd been a second before. We need backup! And we need to find the source! As if in answer, a psychic command echoed through the chamber. Protect the cradle. The xenomorphs suddenly changed their tactics. Instead of an all-out assault, they formed a defensive perimeter, a living wall of chitin and claws, blocking the entrance to a deeper tunnel from which the pulsating hum was emanating. That's it! Endeavor roared. That's where the nest is! He prepared to unleash his ultimate move, a flash fire fist powerful enough to punch through a skyscraper. But before he could, a new figure emerged from the tunnel. It was the king. It moved with a silent, regal grace that was utterly terrifying. It was larger than the others, its crowned head held high, the sickly green light of one for all pulsing in time with the thrum of the hive. Endeavor and Hawks froze. They had seen the security footage from Takoba, but seeing it in the flesh was something else entirely. The corrupted remnants of Deku's costume, the familiar energy now twisted into something monstrous. It was a profound desecration of a hero they had both respected. Midoriya! Hawks whispered, his voice laced with horrified disbelief. The king's voice flooded their minds, cold and vast as a dying star. That name no longer has meaning. He was a flawed vessel. I am the culmination of his purpose. Endeavor grit his teeth, his flames burning hotter with pure rage. You're a monster. A parasite that killed a good kid. I did not kill him. I elevated him. As I will elevate you all. You fight against your own salvation. You cling to your painful, chaotic existence. I have seen the truth, Endeavor. I have seen it through his eyes, through the eyes of all who came before him. Your world is broken. I am here to fix it. The ground began to shake. From behind the king, a new wave of xenomorphs poured out of the tunnel, their numbers far greater than before. But it wasn't the numbers that caused the two heroes to despair. It was the arrival of their backup. A sonic boom echoed through the sewers as Gran Torino arrived, zipping through the tunnels. He was followed by the thunderous steps of Mirko, her powerful legs propelling her forward, and close behind them, the rest of Class 1A. Bakugo was at the forefront, explosions already popping in his palms. Deku! He screamed, his voice a raw, furious bellow. I'm gonna blast that slimy bug costume right off you and drag you back to reality. Todoroki was beside him, one side frosting over, the other beginning to smoke. Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, Yayorozu, they were all there, their faces a mixture of horror, determination, and heartbreak. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene, the two top heroes locked in a standoff with a legion of monsters, and at their center, the being that wore their friend's face. The king turned its eyeless gaze upon them. It recognized them. Every single one. It felt the surge of memories, training exercises, shared laughter, desperate battles fought side by side. For a heart-stopping moment, the psychic pressure lessened. The drones and warriors around it hesitated, their predatory instincts momentarily held in check by a command from their king that was born of a ghost's memory. Its voice entered all of their minds, but this time, it was different. It was softer, layered with a tragic, sorrowful echo of Izuku Midoriya. My friends, the words were a devastating blow, more powerful than any physical attack. I am not your enemy. I am offering you a better world. A world without pain. Without villains. Without the struggle you endure every day. You, of all people, should understand. You have fought, you have bled, you have lost. Why? To maintain a broken system. Visions flooded their minds, tailored for each of them. Todoroki saw his abusive childhood, the pain his family endured because of Endeavor's ambition. Ida saw his brother, crippled by Stain, a victim of a flawed hero's society. Uraraka saw her parents, struggling with poverty, a problem that heroes couldn't punch away. Join me, the king pleaded, its telepathic voice filled with a chilling, genuine conviction. Let go of your individual burdens. Become part of the glorious whole. Together, we will cleanse this world. We will bring true, lasting peace. We will all be saved. For a second, there was silence, a stunned, horrified quiet as the heroes struggled against the seductive, poisonous logic of its words. The silence was shattered by a single, explosive roar. Shut up! Katsuki Bakugo, his face contorted in a mask of incandescent rage and grief, launched himself forward. He was a blur of orange and black, propelled by a series of massive explosions. The Deku I knew would rather die than become a monster spouting this crap, he screamed, tears of fury streaming from his eyes. He wanted to save people, not turn them into puppets. If you won't come back, then I'll drag you back. He cocked his fist back, his gauntlet glowing with the power of a howitzer impact, aimed directly at the heart of the king. The xenomorphs surged forward to defend their progenitor, and the first battle for the fate of the earth began in the darkness beneath the city. The battle beneath Musidiful was not a victory. It was a chaotic, brutal retreat. Bakugo's furious charge, born of desperation and grief, had been the spark that ignited the powder keg. The heroes of Class 1A, their minds still reeling from the king's psychic sermon, were thrown into a desperate fight for survival against a legion of monsters that were once ordinary people. The king did not engage directly. It stood like a silent, observing god, its eyeless face tracking the battle with an unnerving stillness. It didn't need to fight. Its children, guided by its unified consciousness, were more than enough. They fought with a terrifying synergy that no hero team could match. The armored warriors formed impenetrable walls, the spitters provided suppressing fire from the ceiling, and the sidearm drones flowed like a tide of black death, flanking and overwhelming them at every turn. Endeavor's flames were a powerful deterrent, but the sheer humidity and enclosed space of the hive worked against him, limiting the scale of his attacks for fear of flash-boiling his allies. Todoroki's ice was more effective, creating massive barriers and freezing swathes of the horde, but the creature's acidic blood melted through his constructs with alarming speed. Mirko's powerful kicks could shatter a warrior's carapace, but she was quickly swarmed, forced to retreat with deep gashes in her legs. The most horrific moment came when Kirishima, in his unbreakable form, charged forward to protect Uraraka from a flanking drone. He hardened his body just as the creature's tail lashed out. The bladed tip, unable to pierce his skin, instead injected its mutagenic payload directly into his rocky carapace. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The alien mutagen warred with his quirk, causing his hardened skin to bubble and warp, black, chitinous growths erupting from his arms. He screamed, not just in pain, but in sheer terror, as he felt an alien consciousness trying to worm its way into his own. It was only a concentrated blast from Bakugo that forced the drone back, and a quick intervention from Yaoyorozu, who created a broad-spectrum quirk suppressant injection on the spot, that halted the transformation. The experience left Kirishima pale and trembling, the psychic violation a far deeper wound than any physical injury. They were losing. They were outmaneuvered, outnumbered, and psychologically shattered. "We have to fall back!" Ida yelled, his engines flaring as he dragged a wounded Gran Torino out of the fray. "We cannot win here! We need a new strategy!" The retreat was a frantic, fighting withdrawal. Bakugo laid down a relentless barrage of explosions, a curtain of fire and fury that gave them the space they needed to escape the cistern. As they fled back through the resin-coated tunnels, the xenomorphs did not pursue. A final, sorrowful message from the king echoed in their minds, a chilling promise that hung in the air long after they reached the surface. Run. Hide. It makes no difference. Salvation is inevitable. They emerged into the night, covered in filth, blood, and the acidic slime of their enemies, their hearts heavy with a defeat that felt absolute. They hadn't just lost a battle, they had lost a friend to something utterly incomprehensible. The Muzutafu incident, as it would come to be known, was over. The war for the world had just begun. Panic was a virus, and the media was the perfect vector. Despite the Hero Public Safety Commission's best efforts to control the narrative, the truth, or a terrifying version of it, leaked out. It was impossible to hide a battle of that magnitude. Eyewitness accounts from terrified civilians who had felt the tremors, shaky cell phone footage of heroes emerging from the sewers, and anonymous leaks from within the HPSC painted a horrifying picture. The initial reports were chaotic and contradictory. A new type of Noma. A villain with a bioengineered army. But then a single, clear image, taken by a news drone that had slipped the quarantine cordon, hit the global networks. It showed the king, standing briefly at the sewer entrance before melting back into the darkness. The image was grainy, but the details were unmistakable. The biomechanical form, the crested head, and the twisted, corrupted remnants of Deku's iconic hero costume. The world shattered. Izuka Midoriya. Deku was not just Japan's #1 hero. He was a global icon, a symbol of hope and perseverance in a post-All Might world. His smile had sold merchandise, his story had inspired millions. The idea that this beacon of light had become a monster was not just frightening, it was a fundamental betrayal of their reality. Global markets crashed. An emergency session of the United Nations was called. Countries sealed their borders, and cities far from Japan descended into riots fueled by fear and paranoia. Who could be trusted? What if this was a contagion? What if the monsters could look like anyone? The term Xenomorph. Pulled from the classified mission report of the UHV All-Star, entered the public lexicon, a new name for a primal fear. Quarantines were established, not just around the Musutafu ward, but around entire cities. But the xenomorphs were not a conventional army. They didn't march down streets. They moved through the shadows, through the forgotten spaces of the world. A single drone, birthed in the Musutafu hive, could travel for miles through sewer systems and subway tunnels, emerge in a neighboring prefecture, and begin a new hive with a handful of fresh hosts. The outbreak was not a frontline. It was a cancer, metastasizing in the dark. Within a week, reports of smaller hives began to surface. A fishing village on the coast went silent. A section of the Shizuoka prefecture's sewer system became a no-go zone. The creatures were intelligent, adaptable, and guided by a tactical genius that knew Hero Society's every move before they made it. The king was playing a global game of chess, and humanity didn't even understand the rules. In the sterile white halls of UA High, now a forward command center for the Hero Resistance, the emotional fallout was a silent, creeping poison. The school was a fortress, but no walls could keep out the grief and despair. Tashinori Yagi sat in his old office, the room dark save for the glow of a monitor replaying the footage from the sewer battle. He had watched it 100 times, his frail body racked with a cough that was more from guilt than sickness. He saw the king's regal, terrifying posture. He heard the psychic voice that wore his successor's vocal patterns like a mask. And he felt the ultimate, soul-crushing failure. He had chosen this boy. He had gifted him with one for all, the sacred torch of heroism, believing it would be the key to a brighter future. Instead, he had given the boy a power that had made him the perfect vessel for an apocalyptic horror. The quirk he had bestowed to save the world was now the engine of its potential destruction. Every new xenomorph that was born, every life that was consumed, was fueled by his legacy. He would occasionally touch the spot on his chest where the embers of the quirk had once burned bright, and feel nothing but a phantom limb, an aching void. He had given Izuku his power, but he had also given him this curse. The weight of that sin was heavier than any villain he had ever faced. He was no longer a symbol of peace. He was the architect of the apocalypse. Katsuki Bakugo was a caged inferno. He had been confined to UA's training grounds, where he spent nearly every waking hour blasting replicas of the xenomorphs into slag. The usual explosive joy of his quirk was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. His explosions were more focused, more powerful, more lethal than ever before. He didn't speak to anyone, his crimson eyes burning with a mixture of rage, denial, and a gut-wrenching guilt that he refused to acknowledge. He replayed the moment on the Hadley over and over in his mind. The facehugger leaping. Deku pushing Uraraka out of the way. If he had been faster, if his reaction time had been 1/10 of a second quicker, he could have blasted the creature out of the air. It should have been him. It would have been better if it had been him. His quirk was pure destruction. It would have been a fitting end. But Deku, the self-sacrificing idiot, had to be the hero one last time. This fueled a new, terrifying obsession. He was no longer competing with Deku to be the #1 hero. His new purpose was singular. He was the only one who had the right to face the king. He was the one who had started this rivalry, who had pushed Deku, who had helped shape him. Therefore, he was the only one who could end it. Whether that meant snapping him out of it with a blast powerful enough to rattle his soul, or putting him down for good, he didn't care. It had to be him. It was his burden, his final, terrible responsibility in their shared story. Ochako Uraraka was drowning in heartbreak. She spent her time in the support labs with Mei Hatsum, not training, but researching. Her corner of the lab was covered in printouts of the xenomorph's biology, recordings of its psychic voice, and tactical maps of the hive's expansion. She clung to a desperate, perhaps foolish, hope, the belief that the real Izuku was still trapped inside the monster. She focused on the king's moment of hesitation before Bakugo's charge, on the faint, terrified whisper for help that had echoed in the minds of those closest to him. To everyone else, it was a ghost, a meaningless echo. To her, it was proof. It was a lifeline. His desire to save people was the strongest thing about him, she explained to a concerned Momo Yaoyorozu, her voice trembling but firm. It was stronger than his fear, stronger than his pain. It has to be stronger than this hive. It can't just be gone. If we can find a way to reach him, to amplify his true self, maybe we can fight it from the inside. Her mission was no longer to defeat the king, but to save the boy. She worked tirelessly, collaborating with telepathic heroes and scientists, trying to devise a way to breach the psychic fortress of the hive mind. She was looking for a key, a frequency, a memory, anything that could serve as a beacon to guide Izuku Midoriya home from the abyss. It was a race against time, a battle for a soul that the rest of the world had already written off as lost. Shoto Todoroki approached the crisis with his characteristic cool logic, but beneath the surface, a quiet horror simmered. He was the one who coordinated the data, who analyzed the xenomorph's adaptations and predicted their movements. He treated the king not as his fallen friend, but as a hostile strategic commander. It was a coping mechanism, a way to distance himself from the horrifying reality. He saw the perfection of the hive's strategy, and recognized the mind behind it. The king was using Izuku's own analytical skills, his near-superhuman ability to deconstruct and counter his opponents. It knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their psychological triggers. He remembered their training exercises at UA, how Izuku would always find a way to win, not just through power, but through brilliant, unconventional strategy. Now, that same brilliance was being used to orchestrate their extinction. Privately, the perversion of his friend haunted him. Izuku had been the one to help him break free from his father's shadow, to embrace his whole self. Now, Izuku's own self had been consumed, his drive for heroism twisted into a monstrous crusade. Todoroki saw a dark reflection in the king's ideology. The hive promised a world of perfect unity and order, a world without the messy, painful conflicts that had defined his own life. For a fleeting, shameful moment during the king's sermon, he had understood the appeal. That understanding terrified him, and it drove him to fight with a cold, precise fury, determined to dismantle the monster's perfect machine, piece by piece. The world of villains reacted to the xenomorph threat not with reverence, but with incandescent rage. This was their world to burn, their society to destroy. They would not be upstaged by some alien invader. In a fortified bunker deep within the Kansai region, Tamura Shigaraki watched the news reports, his fingers scratching furiously at his neck. The skin was raw and bleeding, but he didn't notice. His decay-scarred face was a mask of pure, childish fury. "It's not fair," he hissed, his voice a low, raspy growl. Gigantomachia slumbered in the cavern next door, his snores like distant thunder. The remnants of the Paranormal Liberation Front, Dalby, Mr. Compress, Spinner, and a few loyal lieutenants, watched their leader, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and bloodlust. "This was supposed to be our game." Shigaraki seethed, gesturing wildly at the screen showing a military unit being overrun by xenomorphs. "I was supposed to be the final boss. The symbol of fear. All for one gave me this power to destroy everything, to reset this whole worthless hero's society. And now this bug, comes along with its perfect organism and its salvation." He slammed his hand on the console, and the metal screen decayed into a pile of gray dust. "It's stealing my narrative! It wants to make everything one? To end suffering? That's boring! I want to see it all crumble. I want to see the looks on their faces as their perfect little world turns to dust in their hands. This thing, it's a cheap copycat with a better gimmick." Dalby, leaning against the wall with an unnervingly calm smile, let out a low chuckle. His turquoise flames flickered at his fingertips. "So what's the plan, boss? Sit back and watch the world end without us? Doesn't seem like your style. Or Endeavor's style, for that matter. I'd hate for my old man to get taken out by some generic movie monster before I get the chance." Shigaraki's red eyes narrowed, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. The rage was coalescing into a new, terrifying purpose. He wasn't just a villain anymore. He wasn't a symbol of liberation. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of decay and destruction. And the hive, this symbol of perfect creation and unity, was his ideological opposite. It was a personal, cosmic insult. "No," Shigaraki said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "We're not going to sit back. This world is mine to destroy. The heroes, the civilians, the whole damn system, they're all my EXP. And I'm not going to let this overgrown cockroach steal my kill. He turned to his followers, his eyes blazing with a mad, gleeful light. Get ready, he commanded. We're going bug hunting. The League of Villains, the most wanted criminals on the planet, prepared for war. Not against the heroes, not yet. Their new target was the alien hive that dared to try and destroy the world before they could. It was no longer a battle of good versus evil. It was a three-way war between order, chaos, and a monstrous, twisted form of salvation. The world, caught in the middle, could only watch in terror as the panic spread and the age of heroes bled into an age of monsters. The silence came first. It was a phenomenon on a scale humanity had never before witnessed. At precisely 1400 hours Greenwich Mean Time, across the entire planet, every screen went black. Every television in every home, every digital billboard in every city square, every computer monitor in every office, every tablet and smartphone in every hand, all of them blinked into a silent, featureless void of obsidian. Radio waves turned to static. Satellite uplinks failed. The constant, chattering hum of the global information network was abruptly, unnervingly, silenced. For a few precious moments the world was thrown into a state of collective, confused quiet. People tapped their dead screens, rebooted their devices, and muttered about power grids and solar flares. In the Global Defense Command Center of the newly formed United Heroics Task Force in Geneva, generals and strategists barked orders, their voices tight with panic as their entire planetary sensor network went dark. At the UA Forward Command, Power Loader was screaming about a cyber attack of impossible sophistication, one that had bypassed every firewall on Earth simultaneously. Then, the voice came. It was not a sound that traveled through the air or over broadcast waves. It was a presence. A thought. A psychic pressure that bloomed simultaneously in the mind of every human being on the planet. It was a violation on a species-wide scale, an intimate intrusion into the last bastion of privacy, the self. It was the voice of the king. It was the corrupted, amplified voice of Izuku Midoriya, layered with the cold, ancient chorus of the hive mind. It was calm, impossibly vast, and utterly inescapable. Do not be afraid. The thought echoed in the minds of 8 billion people, from the skyscrapers of New York to the slums of Mumbai, from the research stations in Antarctica to the International Space Station orbiting above. Your devices are silent because you no longer need them to listen. I am speaking to you now, mind to mind, soul to soul. I am the progenitor. And I have come to offer you salvation. On the silent screens, an image began to form. It was not a broadcast, but a psychic projection, a vision forced upon the world's collective consciousness. It was the king, standing not in a dark sewer, but in a void of stars, its biomechanical form radiating a sickly, divine, emerald light. The corrupted vestiges of One for All swirled around it like a ghostly corona, their power palpable even through the vision. You are a species of contradictions, the king's voice continued, its tone that of a disappointed but loving father. You reach for the stars, yet you trample the person next to you to get there. You speak of peace and unity, yet your history is a testament written in blood and tears. You create heroes to protect your fragile order, but you fail to see that the order itself is the source of your suffering. You have been sick for a very long time. I am here to show you the disease. The vision shifted. The king became a conduit, forcing humanity to look into a mirror fashioned from the memories of One for All. The first vision was of a man in a dark suit, his face a ruin of scar tissue, a life support system breathing for him. He sat on a throne of rubble, a malevolent smile playing on his lips as he spoke of control, of taking and giving quirks as if they were trinkets, of ruling the world from the shadows. All for one, the symbol of evil, the ultimate expression of individual power used for selfish gain. You fear tyranny, the king's voice explained, as the vision showed All for One stealing a quirk from a screaming, helpless victim. You fear the strong dominating the weak. And you are right to fear it. It is the natural, inevitable outcome of your society. Your quirks, your precious gifts, create an imbalance of power that will always lead to monsters like him. He was not an anomaly. He was the rule. The vision dissolved, replaced by a rain-slicked alleyway. The hero killer, Stain, stood over the bleeding, crippled form of Tensei Ida, his eyes burning with a fanatic's righteous fire. You celebrate your heroes, the voice continued, its tone laced with a tragic pity. But your hero's society is a lie. It is a system built on popularity, on wealth, on branding. It creates false idols and ignores the true meaning of sacrifice. This man, for all his madness, saw the sickness. He saw the hypocrisy. He tried to purge it with a blade, but you cannot cure a plague by killing a few of the infected. The vision shifted again, faster now, a dizzying, horrific montage of humanity's pain, seen through the eyes of a boy who had wanted to save everyone. They saw Overhaul, his hands tearing apart and reassembling a human body, his obsession with purity a twisted reflection of the world's own fear of change. They saw the terrified, tear-streaked face of a little girl with a horn, Airy, her body a source of endless suffering, a curse she never asked for. You experiment on your own children. You turn their gifts into weapons and their bodies into factories for your own selfish desires. You speak of protecting the innocent, but you are the ones who create the monsters that prey upon them. The montage accelerated into a blur of fire and chaos. The paranormal liberation war. The giant, mindless form of Gigantomachia tearing a city apart. The horrifying, city-wide destruction of Shigaraki's decay. Heroes and villains, indistinguishable in their desperation, dying in the rubble. The faces of the public, once filled with adoration for heroes, now contorted with fear, resentment, and mistrust. This is the pinnacle of your society. The king's voice boomed, the psychic pressure intensifying. This is your plus ultra. An endless, escalating war between those with power, a cycle of violence that has no end. You create villains, then you create heroes to fight them, and the conflict fuels a system that profits from your suffering. You are trapped in a feedback loop of your own design. The final vision was the most personal, the most cruel. It was a memory from Izuku's own childhood. A small, quirkless boy on the ground, looking up at the smirking, explosive form of a young Katsuki Bakugo. The boy's eyes were filled with tears, but also with a desperate, unbreakable resolve. Behind that, another memory, the same boy, standing on a rooftop, his dreams shattered by the words of his greatest idol, All Might. You cannot be a hero, and what of those with no power? The king asked, its voice softening into a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. The quirkless. The weak. The forgotten. Your society, for all its talk of heroism, is built on the simple, brutal truth that some are born better than others. It is a meritocracy of genetic chance. For every hero who soars, 1,000 souls are left behind in the dirt, told they are not good enough. I know this pain. The vessel I inhabit, he knew this pain better than anyone. It was the wound that defined him. The visions faded. The king returned, alone in the void of stars. The sermon was moving from diagnosis to prescription. You cannot be saved by heroes. Not anymore. They are a bandage on a fatal wound. They are a temporary solution to a permanent problem. The problem is you. Your individuality. Your ego. The I that separates you from us. It is the source of all your pain. Your fear of death, your envy of your neighbor, your greed for resources, your lust for power, it is all born from the prison of the self. But I offer you a better way. I offer you a gift. The gift of unity. The gift of purpose. A new vision bloomed. It was not a memory, but a projection of the king's ideal. It was a world transformed. The sharp, chaotic edges of human cities were softened, replaced by the sweeping, organic, biomechanical architecture of a global hive. There was no war, no crime, no poverty. There were no individuals. There were only bodies moving in perfect, silent synchronicity. They tended to the hive, they expanded it, they defended it. There was no fear on their featureless faces, no anger, no despair. There was only the serene, silent hum of the hive mind, a single consciousness in billions of bodies. Look, the king urged, its voice filled with a messianic fervor. This is not destruction. This is ascension. This is the end of suffering. In the hive, you will not fear death, for you are part of something that is eternal. You will not know loneliness, for you are connected to all things. You will not know conflict, for your will is the hive's will. The only purpose is the continuation and perfection of the species. It is a perfect organism. A true utopia. The vision of the transformed earth was beautiful in its monstrous symmetry, a chilling promise of a world without pain because it was a world without people. The process is transformative, the voice admitted, a hint of something that sounded like Izuku's clinical analysis creeping in. It is a painful but necessary surgery to cure the disease of your existence. Your flawed, chaotic flesh will be burned away and remade into something stronger, more perfect. Your noisy, selfish mind will be silenced, and you will be allowed to join the great quiet, the song of unity. This is the ultimate form of heroism. The vessel I was born from wanted to save everyone. A noble, but impossible goal, for as long as you are individuals, you will always be in danger. I will succeed where he failed. I will save every single one of you from the burden of being yourselves. The king in the vision extended a clawed, biomechanical hand. I do not wish to take this gift by force. I am giving you a choice. A final chance to embrace your own evolution willingly. Lay down your arms. Open your hearts. Accept the perfection that I offer. Come, and be one with us. Your suffering will end, and your true purpose will begin. Refuse, and you will only prolong the inevitable. The hive is patient. The hive is eternal. Salvation is coming. The vision faded. The voice receded. The screens across the world remained black. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was not a silence of confusion. It was a silence of profound, species-wide terror, a silence pregnant with the weight of an impossible choice. UA High Command Center. The heroes stood in stunned silence, the psychic voice still echoing in their minds. The emergency generators had kicked in, but the main monitors remained dead, useless slabs of black glass. Bakugo was the first to break. With a guttural roar of pure, undiluted rage, he spun around and slammed his fist into the nearest wall, the plaster cracking and smoking from the barely contained explosion. Lies! He screamed, his whole body trembling. They're all his own damn memories, twisted into lies. He's using his own pain as an excuse. That thing is defiling him. It's wearing his life like a goddamn costume. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild. He wasn't just angry at the king. He was angry at the memories it had used, memories he was a part of, a past he could never erase. Todoroki stood still, his expression a mask of cold fury. His left side was steaming. It's a strategic psychological attack, he said, his voice dangerously level. It's designed to break our morale, to make us doubt our own cause. It's showing us our failures to justify its own monstrous actions. It's logical. It's exactly the kind of strategy he would use. The admission was quiet, and it carried the weight of a profound betrayal. Uraraka was openly weeping, her hands covering her mouth. Did you hear it? She whispered to Momo. Underneath all of it, when it talked about him being on the rooftop. I felt it. Just for a second, it was him. It was his pain. He's in there. He's suffering. Her hope was now inextricably linked with a terrible agony, the knowledge that the friend she wanted to save was being used as a weapon. His deepest wounds turned into propaganda for the monster that wore his skin. All Might had collapsed into a chair, his skeletal form seeming smaller and more fragile than ever. He stared at his own trembling hands, the hands that had once held the power of One for All, the hands that had patted a young boy on the head and told him his dream was impossible. He used my words, Tashinori rasped, his voice cracking. He used my failure. And he was right. All of it. Stain, Shigaraki, the cracks in our society. I was there for all of it. I tried to hold it all together, but I was just one man. I left behind a broken world, a world that could make his twisted logic sound reasonable. He looked up at the other heroes, his eyes filled with a despair so deep it seemed to swallow the light in the room. What have I done? Paranormal Liberation Front Bunker. Shigaraki had clawed 4 deep gouges into his own cheek, his red eyes fixed on the blank wall where the vision had been. The psychic intrusion had felt like a personal violation, a rival villain breaking into his house to lecture him. Salvation? Unity? Perfection? He snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He sounds like a cult leader. Like a hero. He's just another kind of control. Another system. He wants to turn everyone into mindless dolls in his perfect little dollhouse. Dabi leaned against the wall, a slow, cruel smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying the chaos. You have to admit he's got style. A global, unblockable message, that's a bigger debut than you ever got, Tamura. He even used my dear old dad's failures in his little slideshow. Touched a personal nerve. Shut up, Dalby, Shigaraki hissed. He began to pace, his movements jerky and agitated, like a caged animal. He doesn't get it. The point isn't to end suffering. The point is the suffering itself. The point is to watch it all burn down. The chaos, the freedom in destruction. He wants to build a perfect world. I want to be the one to smash it. And every other world too. His rage was crystallizing, his purpose sharpening. The king was not just a competitor for the title of world ender. He was the antithesis of everything Shigaraki stood for. The king was the ultimate symbol of order, a terrifying, absolute unity. Shigaraki was the ultimate symbol of chaos, a being of pure, nihilistic decay. This was no longer about territory or power. It was a philosophical war. Compress, Shigaraki ordered, his voice suddenly cold and clear. Get me everything we have on that spaceship disaster. Get me the hero's mission logs. I want to know what this thing is, where it came from, and how to kill it. He grinned, a horrific sight. The symbol of fear isn't going to let some alien bug preach a better sermon than he can. Inside the king's mind, the external world knew only the voice, the unified consciousness of the king. But to look inside that mind was to stand at the edge of a black hole, a place where individuality was crushed by the gravity of the collective. The familiar, brightly lit meeting room where the vestiges of one for all once convened was gone. In its place was a vast, dark cathedral of bone and resin, the throne of unity. The king itself sat on the throne, a nexus point of psychic energy, its consciousness intertwined with every xenomorph in existence. And before the throne stood the vestiges. They were not prisoners. They were priests. Their heroic wills had not been broken, but bent, their core desires corrupted to serve their new god. Nana Shimura, the seventh user, stood at the right hand of the throne, her form ethereal and draped in shadows that resembled a queen's royal guard. Her fierce, protective instinct, her love for her family, had been repurposed. A mother protects her nest, her shade whispered into the collective. The hive is the only family that matters. All others must be consumed and brought into the fold for their own safety. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stood on the left. His lifelong rebellion against his brother, his desperate yearning for freedom, had been twisted into a new, insidious doctrine. True freedom is the absence of choice, his corrupted will proclaimed. The self is a prison of fear and doubt. We will liberate humanity from the burden of their own minds. The other vestiges were there, arrayed like apostles of a dark faith. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth, his black whip now a symbol of binding all things to the hive, and the sixth, his smoke screen a representation of the hive's stealth and inscrutability. Their defining traits, their very souls, had been reformatted into pillars of the king's philosophy. They were the choir that gave the hive mind its terrible, persuasive harmony. They were the ghosts that gave the monster its hero's knowledge, but they were not all in agreement. Deep within the cavernous cathedral of the king's mind, buried beneath the throne, beneath the chorus of the corrupted vestiges, beneath the overwhelming hum of the hive, there was a single, tiny, defiant point of light. It was a flickering emerald flame in an ocean of absolute darkness, a prison of psychic pressure. It was the last remnant of Izuku Midoriya. He was not a participant. He was a witness, a powerless observer forced to watch through the monster's senses as it used his memories, his voice, his power, to terrorize the world he had given his life to protect. He screamed, but his screams were silent, lost in the psychic maelstrom. He fought, but his struggles were the twitching of a single nerve in a body that no longer answered to him. Yet he did not break. The sermon had been an agony unlike any other. He had felt the fear of 8 billion people. He had felt the heartbreak of his friends, the despair of his mentor. And it fueled his defiance. Every tear Ochako shed, every roar of rage from Kaken, was a drop of fuel on his tiny, flickering flame. I won't let you, the ghost of the boy screamed, his silent cry a prayer against the crushing darkness. I will save them. I will save them from you. I will save them from me. The point of light flared, just for a moment, causing a flicker of dissonance in the hive mind, a single skipped beat in the heart of the monster. On the throne, the king tilted its head, a motion of infinitesimal curiosity, as if noticing a faint, irritating noise from a distant room. Then it dismissed the sensation, turning its vast consciousness back to the world it was about to remake. The sermon was over. The time for persuasion was ending. The time for conversion was about to begin.